Today, episode 80 on Enjoy 24, we had the pleasure of having Sapha on the podcast. Sapha is a therapy consultant at Sacred Rebels in Peru. We talk about his experience and lived experiences through addiction and his journey into recovery. And we talk about Sapha's work as an ayahuasca worker and treatment in Peru. It was a great talk, a lot of knowledge, a lot of authenticity. It was a good one. When Alex first told me about you, it's the field I'm in right now. I don't know if you know about the organization of Peak House in Vancouver. It's a youth recovery center for high trauma youth and high substance youth. And I'm one of the youth counselors there full time. And
oh, wow. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm really happy to know that.
For sure. And it's totally in the alleyway of what we're going to be talking about, because I'm working with youth from the age of 14. Well, actually, we've actually increased the age to 24. It's a 10-week program of just recovery. We're not abstinence. We're more of a harm reduction organization. So yeah, man, I'm definitely interested to hear your story. And, you know, I want to talk about Sacred Rebels. I want to talk about your organization and what you guys do, but honestly, I want to know about your story through addiction and your journey through it and how it all came about, really, because that's something I'm, very curious about, and how people do get into addiction and what causes these things and the different thought processes and all of that. So if you want to take us back, give us from day one.
And Sapha, you just to sort of set the tone here too. So you've been in recovery now for, I believe, about 9 years, right? And you moved from BC down to, now you're there in the Peruvian jungle, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've been in recovery for about 9 years. June 10th, 2015 is the day I went into rehab and stopped using cocaine, alcohol, and opiates.
Take us back to your time in BC and growing up here and the different things that you had to go through and the obstacles, and what was that like? What was Sapha's life like at a young age, and what were the things that happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to the very beginning, my father, he fled Iran during the Islamic Revolution and moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where I was born. He met my mother there, and total dysfunctional relationship, I think, right off the hop. And so, from an early age, I was kind of caught in the crossfire of, two people who weren't able to really get along and would eventually separate after we moved to the Northwest Territories in Yellowknife. And I lived there for about 11 years, and that was kind of where I started to become introduced to alcohol and drugs. I lived in a really low-income neighborhood there called Sissons Court, with a lot of people who aged out of foster school and some of the residential schools that just closed up there in the 90s. And my parents got separated around the age of 8. Yeah, I just kind of went into self-destruct mode, at an early age, and acting out as a child and kind of seeking rebellion wherever I could. Eventually, we moved to Vancouver Island in the year 2000 or 1999. And so that was a really big shift for me, because I got separated from my biological mother at that point due to her own mental health and addiction-related issues, and had to start over, move to a city on Vancouver Island where what I was into was not as well accepted. I grew up in skateboarding and punk rock in the north, and, kind of that was part of my life. And moving to the island, it was a very different vibe, very different culture, and it was an adjustment, making new friends, especially at that age. And my father and I didn't really get along very well. He was very strict, and his focus was more on school and, academic success and things like that. And I had all this trauma from my childhood that carried into my teenage years. And, by the age of 13, 14, I was already using cocaine and ecstasy and cannabis and alcohol. And because of my unstable home life, I often didn't go home. I was out on the street. I was out skateboarding with my friends, and got sponsored by a skate shop at a young age. So I had a lot of older influences around me, guys in their 18, 19, 20s. And, I'm 13, 14, 15. And doing lines of cocaine and getting snuck into strip clubs and, going skating in contests and living that life, and it was this huge escape for me because I just had this freedom, that kind of came with it and this identity around it. And, being in that culture and, being a young kid and getting a chance to do all of those things at such a young age, it was cool. It was rebellious. It was badass. I wasn't part of the normal crowd, and there was this part of it that was really attractive to me. As things went on, I started to notice that, my tendencies to use substances were becoming less and less social, and doing drugs for me meant doing them alone, and finding ways to get more so that I could be somewhere by myself in isolation. And generally, with the way that I was using drugs, especially cocaine and opiates, it was just isolation. I didn't want to be around anybody. And, before the substance use came in, I was suicidal and feeling suicidal at the age of 9, 10 years old, not wanting to be alive, looking for anything I could to really escape. And yeah, that was really a big part of it for me, was just not wanting to feel,
Right.
and just experiencing that deep pain and the loss and separation from my mother, and then this, unstable relationship with my father that I didn't have the emotional capacity or the intelligence to really navigate in a healthy way, and my father wanted the best for me, of course, right? But he just had a very different way of showing it. And in contrast to friends that I had whose parents let them smoke weed and drink alcohol and go to parties and have girlfriends and do all these things, I was like, I wanted that. I didn't want to be in bed by 9 o'clock, studying for a math test. Fuck that. Mm-hmm. I wanted to party. I wanted to go and have fun with my friends and live that life, and it was a hard thing to break from. And by the age of 19, I had attempted suicide several times. And right around that period of my life, I got a job working in the oil and gas industry in Alberta, after being denied entry into the armed forces. And, I grew up pretty poor most of my life. So all of a sudden, 18, 19 years old, I've got a job working in the oil and gas industry in Alberta, and I'm making $10,000-12,000 a month, and moving into that pay grade as an addict, and I did that for 12 years. I lived paycheck to paycheck on $10,000 to $12,000 a month, and I just did drugs alone.
Right.
That was my reality. Yeah.
One thing you said that was interesting to me is that by the age of 9 or 10, you started having those suicidal thoughts, and you knew that you didn't want to feel this pain anymore, and you wanted to not be here. And I think that's interesting and fascinating because at such a young age, it seemed like you were aware of the writing on the wall and what was going to be the next several years of your life, right? Because I think for a young person at that age, at 9 or 10, they just know that they're going through insurmountable pain and stress and anxiety. But I don't think any 9 or 10-year-old at that age would be able to tell themselves or have made the decision in their head that life would be better not being here, right? And I think that's quite interesting. Do you feel like you were more aware than your peers at that age, knowing that there was going to be years of hardship following that?
Yeah, it was a very confusing time of my life. On one hand, I had my mother, who was very creative and artistic and very encouraging of, exploring my creativity and doing these things that I was passionate about. And then I had my father on the other side, who was the most important thing is academic success and financial success and working towards becoming a doctor or a lawyer, right? So I was really torn and just felt like I didn't really know my place and was really insecure and lacked the confidence, in myself, right? And so when those first feelings of not wanting to be alive came in, I was around 9 years old, and I remember clearly taking the lead out of a pencil in school, it was graphite, right? But I always heard, oh, you get lead poisoning, don't. And so I swallowed all of this lead graphite out of these pencils. And the teacher was like, why are you, doing that? And I was crying, just saying, I don't want to be alive, and I ended up getting, taken to the counseling office, and my parents were involved, and it was this big thing. And I remember, going to a psychiatrist, 9, 10 years old, that my mother was going to at the time, and just a very confusing time for a child, right? And
kidding. And
yeah.
And do you think that it is often underplayed as far as like children, when people think about children's emotions and what they like, how they feel and how they process trauma and all this type of stuff. I at least personally, and I have witnessed it. I feel like it's often not paid enough attention to, that the things that kids are going through can have a much greater impact and can really change the course of their life later on, based on those events that happen to them. Because I know when I was a kid, and I didn't go through anything as serious as you, so I don't want to downplay what you've gone through, but I just remember, anytime I felt sad about something or I felt depressed about something and it wasn't something I could shake off, I just remember friends and family would just tell me, shrug it off, whatever, just stop thinking, put it out of your mind. And I couldn't. It's not a switch I can just turn off. And I just remember that experience, and I don't have kids myself, but it's something I always think about. It, what are kids going through, and are parents paying enough attention? And even counselors. I just remember, going to public schools, counselors often in the school weren't really well equipped to deal with a lot of the problems that kids were having. And of course, every school is different too. Some schools, depending on where they are, if it's in a lower income neighborhood, a lot of these kids have more problems. There's higher divorce rates, and that leads to all sorts of other issues that we could talk about. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that. If you think, is that something that parents and counselors don't pay enough attention to?
Yeah, I think things have definitely evolved in a really good way in terms of, addressing mental health related difficulties relating to youth in this day and age, and in the 90s for myself and where I was living at the time, it was like I was a bad kid. I was a bad kid, and, my behavior was bad, and it was because of something fundamentally wrong with me. And, at no point, even in my teenage years and even into my early adult life, was there really any acknowledgement of what I had gone through as a child. The problems with my parents, the aggression, some of the ways that I would be disciplined, physically, and, being, talked down to and being belittled, and, even into my adult life, things that I heard said to me as a child, I repeat out loud to myself, I beat myself up. You're an idiot. You're fucking stupid. Why didn't you do this? All of these little things come up, and that's not me talking, actually. I've realized this in my therapeutic process over the years, because I've done a lot of work on myself in the last 9. And so, a lot of the things that I learned as a kid, they leave an imprint, they leave this impression. And I feel like, a lot of the stuff that's coming out now in studies related to trauma and treatment-resistant depression is that, it's less a chemical imbalance and more actual neurological damage that happens as a result of stress, and the body's, defense mechanisms. And yeah, I think that a lot of progress has been made in supporting youth. And I also think that there's still a long way to go. And what I've really found helpful for me is having people with lived experience, in that supportive role, like people who've been through it, people who've experienced trauma or experienced addiction, who have, a personal reason to be involved in the work that they're doing to support people. And, we know, somebody like myself who's struggled with severe depression or anxiety or substance use is like, when somebody says, I'm also in recovery, or, these or things that I went through in my childhood, there's a connection that's made there. And I think that's really powerful for youth to see and to have that level of understanding and community and camaraderie. Because something that I definitely noticed, going back to my childhood was like counselors and people that, were in that role. I feel like they were ill-equipped, actually.
They didn't have that life experience.
Exactly, yeah. They had the academic education and, the book smarts and everything, but in terms of the ability to have capacity, emotional capacity, to hold space for somebody and be loving and compassionate and supportive, you can't really teach that in school. You get that from living through it.
Right.
Yeah, and going back to your time in BC, you said you had that high-paying job, and you were obviously spending a lot of money, living from paycheck to paycheck. Tell me more about how you got help and what the experience was like. Where did you go? How did you get help? And was the system, quote unquote, did it work, or did it fail you in any way? How did you end up being where you are now?
Yeah, so after my first real major suicide attempt when I was 19 years old, I was committed to the hospital and had to go to mental health and addictions and do counseling and do all of these different things, and it was quite forced on me, by my family and also by the courts and the police, and it was I knew I wanted help. I knew that I had a problem, and I was willing to make the changes, and so I did 12-step fellowships, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, off and on for a decade, and was never able to get more than a couple of months together without going back to using. And I never actually really deepened into therapy or counseling. Like, I would go and kind of talk about, what was going on for me, and then I would do good for a little while and then kind of back. And I experienced a lot of trouble with the law during that time, assault charges, selling drugs, and almost every time it was like I had these mandatory, I had to go to meetings, I had to, check in with my probation officer and make sure that I wasn't using drugs and alcohol, and even, had to see a forensic psychiatrist. And until I was 26, I was on, Wellbutrin and Seroquel and all these variety of medications to treat the depression, which ultimately was what kept me using, was this, not wanting to be alive. And so my escape came through substance use, cocaine, alcohol, and opiates. And I always knew, it wasn't working, right? It was so much, it was just like making everything worse all the time, right? And I felt like I could never get out of it. And so, ultimately what really broke me out of it and showed me the severity of what I was sitting with and what I needed to do in order to get well was an accidental psychedelic experience in 2014. It was like, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. I had no alcohol or drugs that I was using left, and there was nowhere to get anything. And I was living in Dawson Creek, BC at the time, because I worked there, and just outside of Dawson Creek, there's another city called Grand Prairie. And so anyways, long story short, a friend of mine had sent me a vial of LSD from the Vancouver area and was like, pray, meditate, write a gratitude list, go for a walk in nature, exercise, eat healthy, take 2 drops of this on a sugar cube, and think about what you want your life to be like in the next 5 years, right? And I mean, I started doing psychedelics when I was 13, 14 and never did it for spiritual reasons at all, right? And didn't really have a grasp of any of that at this point in my life. And, I was an intravenous drug user at that point, and I didn't have anything to do. And so I was like, okay, well, let's see what happens if I inject this whole vial of acid, not thinking it was going to even really do anything. And whether it was even LSD or not, I didn't know. And my own desperation, I was like, whatever, I've got nothing to lose. So that's what I did. I injected this entire glass vial of LSD directly into my vein. And within moments. Like I remember having just this rush come through my body and going to the mirror and looking at myself and just had this maniacal smile on my face and was like, started to feel the effects come on. And I went through this like 10, 12-hour psychedelic experience that just completely immobilized me. And I was, seeing patterns and visions and colors. And there was also this like really clear message that if I ever wanted to be happy and I ever wanted to, live a high quality of life, I needed to stop doing what I was doing to myself. 16 years of self-harm, suicidality, extreme levels of substance use, dangerous substance use. And, and the message was, you need to go to rehab. That's the only way you're going to break this. And so 2 days later, I packed up everything that I had. I moved back to Nanaimo and I started going to mental health and addictions. And I was just really clear, I'm suicidal. I've been a drug addict for my entire life. I'm tired of it. I really want help. People are starting to die now because of this fentanyl stuff. And I don't want to die. I want to get well and live my best life. And so I went through all the hoops. I filled out all the applications, the paperwork. I went every single day to counseling. I went, I did all the things. And I was still using at the time. The experience that I had showed me what I needed to do, but I lacked the ability to actually stop using. And so, I struggled, right? And then I thought, okay, this is my lucky break. The Ministry of BC is going to help me. There's funding for people to go to treatment. I've worked all these years and paid all this tax money. I'm going to get help. And I got a call from the Ministry of BC, and they were like, "Hi, we've reviewed your application, and we've determined that you don't qualify for government-assisted treatment." And I was so shocked because I'm like, what? Like, I've done every single possible thing. I'm showing up every day.
Right.
If I don't go to rehab, I'm going to die, And
how long was that application? How long did that
It took 6 months.
6 months just to get that answer saying sorry.
It took 6 months. Yeah, it took 6 months for them to tell me no. Even the nurse who was helping me was so shocked, and she's like, I can't believe this. And so their answer was that we looked at your T4, like your tax return from the previous year, and because you made more than $600 a month, the government of British Columbia won't provide you funding for treatment. And I was like, well, I left that job so that I could come and get help. And she said, well, you made all that money, like, why can't you pay for treatment yourself? This is actually what the person working for the ministry asked me. And I was just kind of like, well, because I'm a drug addict and I live paycheck to paycheck, like, I don't have any of that money. I spent it all using. And so her response was like, well, if you really want to go, then you need to apply for welfare, prove that you've quit your job, and then reapply for treatment, right? And that completely broke me. That broke me. Here I am at this point in my life. I have this big shift. I'm feeling confident. I'm still, struggling with using. But I'm determined, right? And I'm like, I'm gonna get this help. It's gonna come through. The government's gonna help me, And I got totally shunned and was just baffled by it. And so it drove me back into being suicidal again. And I actually wrote my family a suicide letter, explaining that I can't go through another winter in British Columbia as addicted to drugs. Like, I would just rather die, And I used to look out from my the apartment that I rented in Nanaimo down at the pier. And, I was like, I'm just going to tie a couple of dumbbells around my waist and jump in the water in the middle of the night. Nobody's even going to know where I went. That's really where I was at, right? And my aunt, who I hadn't spoken to in almost 20 years, my mom's youngest sister, she got the email because, somebody forwarded it to her. And she called me that morning and was like, I'm an administrator at a treatment center in Saskatchewan. I told my boss your story, and she said that I get a freebie for a family member. So if you want to come to treatment, get on a plane and come to Saskatchewan, and you can come for free. And so I was like, okay, this is it, And I got on a plane. I drank my last Canadian Club little shooters on the airplane ride there, and went to rehab and walked in June 10th, 2015, and that was the last time I ever touched drugs or alcohol in that way.
Would you say that actually, just to go back to the LSD thing, would you say that that was the thing that that really, because I know you went into rehab right after that, but do you think anything would be different had you not had that psychedelic experience? Would you attribute sort of your path to recovery to that experience specifically? And do you also think that microdosing is a valid solution for a lot of people? Because I know there's a lot of studies being done on people, and they always say the benefits of it. So I'm just curious how you feel about that.
I mean, undoubtedly, if I didn't have that experience, I wouldn't be here. I would have died. I'm confident that I would have died, because I'm no different than any of the 35 people that I've lost since 2015, and I used in the same ways, maybe even in more extreme ways than some of those people that I grieve every day. And that psychedelic experience, it wasn't enough to keep me from using, but it was enough to really show me that I could stop if I sought the correct help and went through the correct channels. And in terms of microdosing, I mean, first and foremost, I'm a harm reductionist. I've done street outreach and drug user advocacy for a long time, and my whole approach is about empowerment and supporting people and making really healthy, positive decisions that are going to be right for them. And like anything, psychedelics have their limits. They have their limits. And right now, I've been really working on changing this narrative that seems to be, within the psychedelic world and the mainstream, discussion around addiction being cured with psychedelic treatments. And it's a tool, right? It's a tool. It's a very small piece to a much bigger problem and a much more complicated conversation. And are psychedelics right for everybody? Definitely not. Definitely not. Do I? Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sapha, but one thing you said that was I'm glad you said it, was that you're a harm reductionist. And the program that I'm working for, we're not an abstinence program, we're harm reduction. And do you think, what are your thoughts on abstinence versus harm reduction? Do you think there are possibilities and it is realistic to approach an addict or someone that is in recovery to have them go into full abstinence? Or do you think it's more realistic to make them understand their drug use and become more aware of it, so they are implementing things that help them reduce harm, and then from that, through their journey of recovery, ultimately and eventually they will get to abstinence? There's obviously cases and anecdotes of people going straight into abstinence, but do you think the route taken more often is through harm reduction? And do you see a world, do you see a time where, we can get to a point where we treat people through the recovery into abstinence more often than not?
I think harm reduction is essential. The legalization of cannabis is a harm reduction movement. The legalization of psychedelics is a harm reduction movement. And first and foremost, it comes down to education. It comes down to a person's own understanding of what harm reduction is for themselves. My first year and a half, when I left treatment, I worked with mushrooms again. I'd taken LSD a few more times, and the counselor that I had at the treatment center, asked me, "What's your plan when you leave here?" And I was like, well, I struggle with a couple of really severe chronic pain conditions. I know that I can't use opioids or any type of painkiller medications, prescription medications, because I'll abuse them. So I'm really curious about exploring cannabis as an alternative. And I have this interest in continuing to work with psychedelics because of that experience that I had that really gave me the power to work towards making this change. And she just said, whatever you do when you leave here, don't let anybody tell you that that's wrong. And so as I embarked on that journey and working with psychedelics, I was doing step work actually in NA. And I would take, a dose of mushrooms on the weekend, and then Sunday I'd reflect on the questions in this, Narcotics Anonymous step guide, as controversial as that was. And it was incredibly supportive and helpful and allowed me to work through some serious difficulty. But when I finally disclosed that this was what was happening for me and that I was working with psychedelics, I got completely ostracized. my sponsor was like, "You're using drugs, you're not clean." And, there was this whole thing that happened.
Wow.
That was really devastating to me personally. And I can see why,
Yeah.
it's possible that somebody who's abstinent from substances has a psychedelic experience and they're not able to process what they went through, and it leads them back to using drugs. And, it's a possibility. And in terms of harm reduction versus abstinence, I mean, I think that the important question is like, what substance is the person, working towards abstaining from or reducing harms with, because some are much more complicated than others. Opioid addiction is a serious beast. It's a serious beast.
Right.
It's a tough one.
And Sapha, it's just to piggyback on what you just said about NA and the 12-step process. It's interesting because with NA, it's very abstinence-based, and any type of drug or any type of substance is considered using. Do you think with that, you mentioned that you were ostracized and you were sort of shunned from the NA program because of obviously, using psychedelics, but through your perspective, it was a way of harm reduction. Do you think the NA system, and whether it's NA or Alcohol Anonymous or any type of support group with the 12-step, do you think it is a bit rigid in the sense that they don't allow the possibility of harm reduction and open-mindedness in each particular individual and their own story and their own specific way of recovery? Because every individual that is in NA has a different journey, and it has a different it has a different story on what they have been using, their DOC, the amount, and the different traumas that they've been through. So do you think, as a system through NA and the 12 steps, there is a bit of strictness and not enough wiggle room in having that understanding and that perspective to look at someone's predicament and understand that they are moving towards their recovery and becoming sober, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely going abstinent and not using completely? Do you think that there should be a shift in perspective through NA?
I think one really big thing that I have noticed and observed is that there's the literature and there's the program. And in those books, it encourages people to seek outside help. And it encourages people who struggle with grave mental difficulties or physical illness to seek the help of a doctor or the support of a therapist or a physician. And that the decision to use medications is between a person's higher power, their sponsor, and their doctor. And so what we're really talking about in terms of, this rigidity this is the fellowship. This is political ideologies and questions of morality that members of the fellowship bring in, based on essentially a doctrine of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. But in the books, it says it right there, and when I got separated from my community there, I actually had a friend with 27 years that invited me over for coffee and was like, "Hey, I want to read something to you." And it was this part out of the literature that said, people with severe mental health difficulties, are encouraged to seek medication and support. And as controversial as it might be, the medication that I chose to seek help with was psychedelic medication. And I ultimately found a psychedelic therapist and somebody that I could work with in a professional way that could support me adequately, intentionally, and provide help in my process through taking my experiences and applying them to improve the quality of my life in a really practical way, and not having to be reliant on it. Not having to, I got to take mushrooms this week because I had a bad week. Actually, quite the opposite. Like, I don't take psychedelics if I'm in that place. I have the skills and the tools now and the therapeutic support and the community when I'm in difficulty to talk about it and gain that help. And part of what allowed me to get there was working with psychedelic medicine in a really healthy and positive, constructive way. And so that's what I teach and support people in. And it's crazy because like even that sponsor who ostracized me years later started to work with psilocybin. And my NA, one of my NA sponsors, he came to his first ayahuasca ceremony with me a week after he took an 11-year cake. And he's part of the rehab program that we built down here that's entirely peer-led. It's all people with lived experience. It's all people who found recovery. And like myself, like abstinence wasn't enough. I thought that once I quit drinking and doing drugs, like my life was just going to miraculously get better. And 3 years into not using alcohol, cocaine, or opiates, I struggled with physical difficulties, major depressive disorder, and this just deep pain that nothing could help me. And then out of desperation, I actually was like, okay, well, the last thing I have to try is an ayahuasca ceremony. And I was on a mailing list to participate for 6 years to join this ayahuasca circle and go and do this. And I went to my first weekend and it completely changed my life. And the biggest part about it was actually the community. The ceremony's held in a circle. It's kind of like I tell people it's meditation for dummies. The lights are off. You're in silence. There's a person that sings the medicine songs. And then after you share and you talk about your night. And there was this sense of safety and community support that I was able to build and gather in that. And it made me realize like, wow, like imagine if we could do this for people in recovery, and so that became my goal. And when the pandemic happened and all of the meetings shut down and gatherings shut down and people were, becoming, if you're unvaxxed or you're vaxxed, you can't come out, there's all this separation that started. And my whole goal and motive just was, I'm going to get down to the Amazon, to this teacher's center that I've known about for years. And I'm going to go down there to continue my healing and learn and give myself the time to actually really get to go deeper into my own healing.
Right.
And when did that happen? So you said 2015, you moved to, was it Saskatchewan for rehab?
Yeah, I went to Saskatchewan for 5 weeks. I went to the rehab program. Then I went back to Nanaimo and I just got right into going to NA. I left, working in the trades and decided to go back to university to study social work. And in that process, I made a lot of really incredible friends, academic professionals, 2 of my university professors specifically, who were really supportive of the work that I was doing. I started a harm reduction organization in Nanaimo with a group of peers and people who use drugs so that we could have our own unsanctioned supervised consumption site. And I got burnt out doing that, and I kind of moved more towards wanting to help people who are ready to get off dangerous substances and work in a deeper way towards finding relief from, the underlying causes and issues. And it just kind of evolved into what it is now. And yeah, we have this rehabilitation program here in the Peruvian Amazon.
Right. And how did you, and who did you connect with to make your way down there? Because that's a pretty serious commitment. You're moving to the other side of the world.
Yeah. Well, I had a therapist that I was working with for a number of years, the person that I first drank ayahuasca with. And yeah, I had known about Nihue Rao. This is the center that I'm a part of here. And this indigenous teacher who is really well known and really well respected for the integrity and the quality of the medicine work that he does. So I came down for a month just to kind of see what it was going to be like and get a feel for the place. And I was just like, wow, this is really it. There's ceremony 4 nights a week. There's community here. There's other people in recovery here. It's a beautiful place. I want to stay. And so I basically just positioned myself to be able to come down here and not have to leave. And so I've been here for 3 years now. And, I never thought I was going to be doing the rehab thing. I originally just kind of wanted to grow some food and start a farm and do some food sovereignty work with the local indigenous community. And then, through my own healing, meeting other people in recovery, we were like, wouldn't it be great if we could bring people down here to work, doing permaculture stuff, planting trees, boxing, fitness, the ayahuasca ceremonies. I mean, I take people through the NA step guide here. Like I have all the literature, I have all the books. Like if somebody wants to explore Narcotics Anonymous and that's what they choose to do, I'm like, okay, cool, let's do it, or Recovery Dharma or Alcoholics Anonymous or Smart Recovery or Psychedelics in Recovery. So it's really about giving somebody the opportunity to like explore what they feel is going to be the best fit for them. And if working with psychedelics is going to be part of the recovery, great. Maybe somebody has a struggle with alcohol, but they can have a healthy relationship with cannabis. Maybe somebody has a struggle with opioids, but they can have a couple of glasses of wine. I don't know. It's up to them. And so our whole approach and my whole approach is really just about empowerment and overcoming the trauma and having supportive community and people who aren't going to judge you or criticize you and who are going to be there for you no matter what. And that was my experience, actually.
Sapha, I want your opinion on something, and something that I've been noticing, because part of the programming that we have at the organization I work with, one thing we do for the youth is we take them to NA and AA every Tuesday and Thursday night. And one of the things that I notice, and it is a part of the fellowship, is that, when someone introduces themselves, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm an addict, hi, so-and-so, I find that, it makes me a bit uncomfortable when, people in NA and people that are recovering and have been sober for many, many years still label themselves as addicts. And I want your opinion on that. Why, and do you think that is a healthy way of going about it? And do you think it could be, changed a little bit? Because I think, someone that has been through recovery and has been sober for a lot of years, I personally would think, it would be a good thing to give yourself credit and say, I am not an addict anymore. And I understand the ethos behind that, where it's like, it keeps you almost in a way humble, knowing that you still have that addict tendencies and, the addictive personality within you, which keeps you grounded and keeps you on the right path. But I think to be, I just find it really a little skewed. I find it makes me a little uncomfortable when people do that, even after so many years of being clean. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the construct of that program, and humility is definitely part of it, and continuing to acknowledge that you're powerless and that may work for some people, and I definitely did it for the first 18 months. My name's Sapha, I'm an addict. I don't use those words anymore when I talk about myself. I say I'm in recovery, and that's kind of it. And I think part of the program, they teach it in that way because it's part of building this fellowship and building this safety and this container for people, because that's the way that the program's been designed. I think actually it is problematic for a lot of people, and that's why NA and AA, the success rate and the long-term membership is like 5%.
Wow.
That's how many people can,
wow.
Yeah, that's how many people go through the doors and never come back. Whether they choose not to come back or whether they go back into addiction or whether they die, it's 5%. That's the success rate. And that's actually roughly the success rate of most conventional rehab programs. And there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of judgment, and there's a lot of, this narrative around, if you don't do it this way, you're going to die. And for some people that might be true. And for other people like myself, I mean, I just take what I need and leave the rest. I love NA, and I do practice a program of abstinence. I abstain from alcohol, cocaine, and opiates, and I've done it for 9 years. And anybody wants to tell me that what I'm doing is wrong, well, okay. Because like the quality of my life and where I'm at and what I've built for myself is, I never would have imagined I'm doing what I'm doing and get to support people in this way. And help people. And I do a lot of community and youth work here, actually, and teach boxing to kids. I just had a friend donate like 10 pairs of brand new boxing gloves and some training pads. So, I teach all of that here. And part of why I get to do that is, because 12-step recovery laid the foundation for me. It gave me the ability to, relieve the urge to want to use dangerous substances. And it was a big part of that and getting me here. If I didn't have the ability to abstain from alcohol, cocaine, and opiates, there's no way I would have made it this far. It wouldn't have happened. But do I put myself in that box? Definitely not.
Right.
Definitely not. It wouldn't benefit me in any way.
Yeah, and Sapha, I want to take it back a little bit. And one of the common denominators I notice with a lot of youth that come through our program is that they're from very small communities like Vancouver Island, up north, very really small towns that don't have much funding, don't have much going on. What is it with those communities that produce a lot of individuals, youth that are going through struggles and are going through addiction? And is it just simply because of, the fact that there's nothing else to do and there's, just drugs more readily available? What is it in those communities that is just so prevalent?
I think isolation is a big thing. Northern communities. I mean, I used to go up to Port Hardy when I lived on the island, and go up there to visit a family friend. One of my best friend's parents were up there, and we'd go up there and hang out. And you really see it. You really see it, and I know I can share from my own experience living in the Northwest Territories and in a low-income neighborhood where it's mostly Indigenous youth, and 9 years old, I'm drinking alcohol. 10 years old, I'm stealing $20 from my mom so I can go in on a gram of weed. That's a pretty young age to be getting into that. Why is that? There's nothing else to do. And there's a lot of other influences around, and there's a lot of other adults using drugs and alcohol, right? And so it's like people kind of become a product of their environment, and it's just also really become part of the culture. I didn't have social media when I was a teenager. I'm glad. Or like this, a lot of the stuff, rap influence and drug related stuff, and kids wanting to drink codeine, cough syrup, and taking Xanax, and like all of these different references to these substances that come from that realm.
Yeah.
That are sketchy, man. It's scary.
Especially now, too. I mean, rap is moving in towards a direction where it's cool to take Xanax and Percocets and all these different kind of benzos and, drinking that codeine and like lean was always a thing. I even remember back in, 08, 07 with Lil Wayne talking about it, and he actually had a lean addiction for a bit. And one of the things, man, till this day, when I do work with the youth that we have, there's so many moments, near the end of their stay in the program, because it is a 10-week voluntary program. In the last couple weeks, you start to see them really panicking and start worrying about their life after the program. And, for the ones that are in such low income communities and such just destructive little communities and towns, so many times they tell me, Mo, I can't go back there. I really don't want to. I'm scared. I don't want to. Like, the first thing I'm gonna notice when I walk back into my house is the smell of weed and, a family member using right in front of me. And every single time I just have no way or idea of what to say. I don't know what to do, or I'm just totally trumped, and I'm at a loss for words because I can't switch. I can't help them in any way with that. And I just keep it honest with them, and I say, dude, I'm not gonna lie to you. Your situation is fucking brutal, and I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say because your predicament back home and wherever you're going back to is awful. And it's one of those things. For the job that I do have right now, I I still don't even know how to go about it when they say that to me, because it's inevitable for at least one of them to come up to me and say that near the end of their stay that they don't want to go back. They hate the environment they're in. They're handcuffed to what they're to where they are and what they have to deal with and who they see and what they have to encounter every single day. Like there's no breathing room for them. Everywhere they look, every which way, every which direction they look, there's something going on that's destructive and will trigger them at some point. And it's and I'm not asking you for advice of how to go about it and how to word it when I do answer them, but it's just one of those things where I don't even know. I don't, because I understand that it sucks. Like I can't do it. I'm so powerless in that situation. Do you think it's one of, if not the biggest reason why so many youth in underprivileged and low income communities do go into substance use?
Yeah, it's definitely a factor for sure. And I mean, a big part of what I teach and the way that I share a path forward is really about making a solid, concrete plan, having passions. For me, it's the gym, working out, staying in shape, calisthenics, boxing, weight training. I love it. I love it. That was something that I, kind of had robbed from me throughout the years of my addiction, and something that I like to put people towards or turn people onto. And, most communities have those types of supports. And then, it's really about that empowerment piece and helping people build their confidence and get to a point where, that might be their environment, that might be a factor, that might be where they're at. So what do they do to avoid, going back to it or being triggered? They build supportive community. They, maybe AA or NA is all they have, so they go to those meetings in their town, and they find one or two people who are solid, a couple of friends, people that they can go and do things with that are living in some form of a solution, whether or not that's, how they live their whole life, but it's like getting people to that point, and getting somebody to that point takes a long time, right? And I mean, I say no to a lot of people who want to come down here. I actually say no to probably like 95% of people who apply to come down here and do this program to the Amazon. One of the main reasons is prescription medications, but then it's also like the big thing is like, okay, so you went to treatment for 3 months. It's easy to not use drugs and alcohol there. What are you going to do when you go home? What's your work life like? What's your family life like? What's your commitment to like really staying on this path? If I took somebody from the downtown east side and I brought them down here for 6 months, and they didn't gain any other skills other than like the ability to not use drugs and alcohol, if they go back down to being unhoused and living in that neighborhood and living in that community, I mean, I hope that they, are able to maintain it. But then there's those environmental factors that make it extremely difficult.
Right.
I didn't move back when I got to treatment to, the old place and community and people that I was around. I couldn't do it. I even went by, my different name when I first started going to NANA, because I didn't want anybody to even know where I was at. I had to change everything.
One thing, Sapha, and I want your opinion again on this. And I had one particular youth that talked about going back to his community that was completely hopeless, in the best way to explain it. Like complete hopeless community and the worst situation you can think of. And after him telling me all these things that are stacked up against him by him going home and, putting himself back into that community, I was left to just, the only thing I was really left to tell him, the only advice I could really even give him at that point was self-autonomy. It's on you if you want to pick up that joint and smoke it. Because at that point, everything he just laid on me, I had nothing else to say other than that. Do you think that's an ignorant response from me? And do you think self-autonomy in the individual having a solid base and extreme amounts of willpower to be able to say, I am not going to pick up and use, regardless of the million things that are going on around me? Do you think that's realistic? Or do you think that is ignorant and that is near impossible for the individual to do? Because that in his circumstance, that's all I really had to say. It's like, dude, what you're telling me is, it sounds freaking hopeless. Like, I don't even know how you're going to go back there. So all I can really tell you, all I can say as a person looking from the outside in is, you got to make the decision. Am I going to pick up and use it? Unless someone has a freaking gun to your head and says, if you don't use right now, we're going to blow your head off. Other than that, what you really got to dig deep and dig your heels into this whole thing and say, I'm not going to use. Is that possible, or is that just complete ignorance on my part?
I mean, to each their own, you know. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. It's possible. You know, for myself in that situation, yeah, what got me to that point and to have that ability and the confidence in myself was just through doing the work and having supportive friends. You know, like for me, anybody that I have done any work with or sponsored over the years, or that I coach or I'm a mentor for, or that comes through my program, I'm like, you're not paying me to be your friend. Like, you call me when things are good, you call me when things are bad, you call me if you're happy or if things are, you know, not going well, or you're thinking about picking up and using, just call me. Send me a message. Let's set up time to chat. And in the meantime, like, eat something healthy, go for a walk, you know, go to a boxing class, go to the gym, go throw rocks in the ocean, or whatever it might be that you have to get away from that moment, you know, because it's like, something that I've realized with you know, substance use is, it's like, once you've had some time and you're not using, and you've refrained or you've abstained from whatever your DOC was, it's like, it does become a decision. You know, it does become a decision. If you're physiologically addicted to an opioid, and, like, you know, you're going to be insanely sick. And if anybody, you know, I've been dope sick. It's the worst thing you could even imagine. You know, it's like the flu and food poisoning times 100. You know, of course I'm going to go pick up. I can't do that. You know what I mean? You know, but I think once people have that little bit of time, you know, and they have the learning, the education, and hopefully they've made some therapeutic progress in overcoming some of the reasons behind why they use, then yeah, they get to make that decision, and they get to feel strong and do that.
There's a bit of a less of an excuse at that point.
I think so. And at the same time is like, you know, I know that I could smoke weed right now, and I'm not going to go back to using, you know, the drugs that I used to use. There's no way. You know, I know that because I have, you know, and I didn't relapse. You know, I've been drinking ayahuasca for 6 years, and it's only given me more strength and given me more reason to not want to go back to that life. Like, I can't even imagine. I would rather die than use cocaine or use opioids again, or alcohol. And at the same time, I want people to have access to clean, safe drugs. I think safe supply and decriminalizing substance and decriminalizing people who use drugs is essential. You know, I was just in Vancouver this summer visiting the downtown east side and visiting some friends there that started a compassion club to, you know, basically gather research on the efficacy of providing people who use drugs with a safe supply. And, you know, I think it's amazing. I think that that's really the direction things need to go in, is like, you know, alcohol isn't any safer because it's, you know, regulated. Alcohol is super dangerous. Right. So is tobacco. Sure. You know, tobacco and alcohol kill so many people. More people go to rehab for alcohol than any other substance, actually.
For the location that you're in, being in a remote location in Peru, has that had any impact on your recovery? Do you think you could have, do you think you would have had the same level of success being in some kind of program here? Or do you think that as far as your own mental health, because it seems like, at least to me, it comes across that you're very at peace and very happy and very satisfied. It seems like you find what you do very fulfilling. And do you think the location has any play there?
Definitely. I mean, it's 30, 35 degrees Celsius most days of the week. It's, you know, lush. I'm in the jungle. It's great. It's great here. And I think that it doesn't matter where somebody goes. You know, I had a friend who I put through treatment at a center in the Comox Valley. It was like $4,500 a month. You know, he went for 1 month and he was just like, okay, I'm good to go. And the day he got out, he drank alcohol. And not long after that, he started using. I didn't hear from him for a little while. And then he calls me and he's like, oh, I'm at this treatment center on the Sunshine Coast. You know, it's like $30,000 a month. I was like, wow.
God damn it.
A lot. That's a lot of money, 90 grand for 3 months. And I was like, what do you do there? He's like, well, I'm getting a pedicure and eating chocolate ice cream, and then I'm going to go golfing. And I was just kind of like, cool. Like, I hope it works for you. And he got out of there a week later and he was back doing dope. You know what I mean? So it's like, he's doing good now. Thank God he didn't die. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, it doesn't really matter where somebody goes. It's like, where are they at? How bad do they want it? What are they willing to do to change? What are they willing to do when they get out? You know, and that's what I tell people here too. You know, it's not all about ayahuasca. The ayahuasca is a tool. It allows people to build capacity to be gentler with themselves, more compassionate with themselves, get deeper into the root causes of their trauma and the reasons behind why they want to harm themselves through drug use or alcohol use or other difficult things. And, you know, so far I've seen it working really well. And there's a lot of people in recovery that come from AA and NA that still go to those meetings, that come down here and do ayahuasca retreats. And so, you know, it can work and it does work. And the most important thing about it is the container, the people holding the space, and that the people have lived experience like myself. You know, we know our language, we know how to identify with each other, and we know what works and what doesn't work. And there's no judgment. You know, there's no judgment. You know, I'll have a lot of friends who use drugs and alcohol. I still hang out with them. You know, I'm not trying to tell somebody, oh, you got to go to NA and you got to stop using drugs and, you know, you like, I worry, no doubt, you know, because a lot of the people that have died they weren't like me. They were recreational drug users. You know, they got a bad pill or they, you know, got a bag from somebody they didn't know and they died. You know, and why is that? It's because drugs are not regulated. There's no clean, safe source to go and purchase your drug of choice from, and you have to risk that it's contaminated with poison.
Do you think that you have an addictive personality? How much does that come into the equation as far as difficulty trying to get off that stuff?
Also, yeah, I don't. That's a great question, Alex, because I don't believe in addictive personality, because the feeling that drugs give you and the feeling of being high, it's like we've said this before. I mean, who wouldn't want to feel that way? I mean, it's not really about having an addictive personality. It's just wanting to feel better and feeling great. I mean, I don't understand. Like, I understand there is an addictive aspect to these things, but I mean, if you brought some alien down from Pluto and said, oh, this certain chemical or this certain substance, if you put it into your body, makes you feel this much better, 10 times better, of course, the alien would be like, well, why isn't everyone doing it? I mean, I don't think it...
I think there's precursors, right? There's pre-existing conditions that are there. You know, for me, it was suicidality as a child, you know, and looking for a way to escape. And my perceived idea of escape was death, not having to feel. And so when I discovered alcohol and I noticed that it gave me that feeling, I craved more. When I discovered cocaine and I noticed it gave me that feeling, I craved more, you know, and it would just slowly escalate. And I think one of my biggest teachers in recovery has actually been my relationship to tobacco, you know, and in a lot of indigenous cultures and in the Shipibo tradition that I'm a student of in traditional Amazonian plant medicine, tobacco is a medicine, you know, it's a medicinal plant. It has purpose and, you know, properties. And I've struggled with nicotine dependence, you know, and as soon as I have one cigarette, I'm back to a full pack a day, like right now, you know, like, so that's always been a lesson for me is like, am I cured? No. You know, when I make that decision to drink alcohol, I know I'm going to have another one. And I know that by the second or third one, I'm getting a bag of cocaine. And I know once the cocaine runs out and I need to go to sleep, I'm going to go out of my way to the ends of the earth to find an opioid or heroin or whatever. And I'm not going to care if it has fentanyl in it. I'm not going to care if it's got benzos in it, you know? And so that's for me, I just make that decision. Like, I know, you know, and one of the things that's shown me that is, do I have an addictive personality? I don't think so, but I think that I have the underlying, you know, existing kind of conditions that are there and are present, that if I'm not managing and maintaining in a healthy way and I let certain aspects of my life go, that it's possible that, yeah, it could be a matter of time. You know, I stopped taking care of myself. I stopped talking to the people that, support me, and I start cutting people out and pushing people away, and I go into that place of isolation and despair. I mean, it hasn't happened. It's been 9 years. I did it for 16 years. Could it happen again? For sure. For sure. But that's why I do the work that I do. That's why I keep doing what I'm doing, so that it's not even a possibility. Do I have an addictive personality? I mean, yeah, I don't know. Put a big bag of chips in front of me and some guacamole and salsa. I'd probably eat the whole thing and not save anything for the next day, but hey, at least I'm not doing dope.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I kind of like pick and choose my battles in that regard.
I hear you, man, and I really do appreciate you coming on, because we do need to wrap up fairly soon here, and I definitely want you to come on in person when you are in Vancouver, and because I feel like there's so much more to unpack, and there's so many different avenues with addiction and the legal system, and how much effort and support there is for these individuals. And I really appreciate you, man. I thank you for reaching out and wanting to come on the podcast, because this has been great.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really excited to learn more about the program that you're doing. And I'll be in Vancouver in June, and I'd love to come on the show and talk more. And
Sure.
yeah, I appreciate just having a chance to tell my story and talk a little bit about where I'm at and what I've been working on down here in the Amazon.
And can you tell us the name of the organization?
Yeah, it's Sacred Rebels Recovery. So people can visit sacredrebelsrecovery.com or at Sacred Rebels Recovery on Instagram. And we're basically a peer-led holistic recovery program that accommodates 2 to 4 people, supported by people with lived experience who've come from addiction, including our physician, including our psychotherapists, and all of the people who support the work that we do here. Everybody has lived experience, and that's kind of a prerequisite to be a part of this work here and what we do. And so, yeah, I welcome anybody to apply. Whether or not it's going to be a right fit kind of depends on the person, but for those that it can work for, it works really well.
Thank you for coming on, and we will definitely keep in touch for sure.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
Sapha.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Who is he and